The ambulance roared down the icy street, sirens wailing, lights flashing red and blue across the winter storm. Drivers swerved, pedestrians froze, everyone bracing for a life-or-death emergency. Then, out of nowhere, a police officer stepped directly into its path. She raised her hand, unmoving, eyes locked on the speeding vehicle. Tires screeched, horns blared. The crowd erupted in fury. "She's stopping a rescue." Phones shot up, recording every second. Was she reckless? Corrupt? Or had she seen something no one else could? What secret inside that ambulance was worth risking her badge and her life? If you want to know what happens next, stay with me until the end of the video. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button on Justice Voice and turn on the notification bell. That way, every thrilling and surprising story will always reach you. It was one of those bitter winter afternoons in Cleveland when the sky hung low with heavy clouds and the streets were slick with patches of ice. The city, dressed in gray, seemed quieter than usual, though the rush of traffic echoed between old brick buildings and rows of storefronts decorated with fading holiday lights. People hurried along the sidewalks, scarves pulled high over their faces, their footsteps quickened by the sharp bite of the cold wind. Suddenly, the sharp wail of a siren broke through the rhythm of the street. A white ambulance, its lights flashing red and blue, came tearing down the avenue, swerving with urgency. Drivers instinctively pulled to the side, tires screeching against wet pavement. Pedestrians froze in place, turning to watch the flashing vehicle speed through, their expressions touched with concern. Everyone knew what an ambulance meant. Somewhere, someone was fighting for their life, and every second mattered. The crowd parted like water before a ship. People stepped aside, some whispering a quiet prayer for the unseen patient. The ambulance roared forward, its horn demanding space, its lights reflecting off frozen puddles like shards of fire on glass. Then, just as the vehicle was about to clear the intersection, something unthinkable happened. From the opposite side of the street, a figure stepped out, firm and unyielding. It was a woman in a dark blue police uniform, her badge glinting under the flashing lights. She raised one gloved hand high, palm outward, the universal signal to stop. Her other hand hovered near her belt, ready, steady. The ambulance's siren wailed louder as if in protest, but she did not move aside. Officer Angela Brown stood directly in the vehicle's path. At first, the people watching couldn't believe it. A police officer halting an ambulance? The air filled with gasps, then with angry shouts. "What the hell is she doing?" Someone yelled from the sidewalk. "She's blocking a life-or-death run," another voice shouted. "Move out of the way. Let them save that person." The anger grew quickly, spreading like fire in dry grass. Phones were raised, cameras rolling. Within moments, dozens of pairs of eyes were fixed on the officer, their disbelief turning into outrage. Angela's face remained calm, though her jaw was set tight. Her breath came in short clouds of steam as the wind lashed against her. The ambulance slowed, its tires skidding slightly as the driver hit the brakes. The blinding lights illuminated her figure, rain beginning to fall in sharp, icy drops. She did not flinch. To the bystanders, it looked like heartlessness. A woman in uniform, preventing a sick or dying patient from reaching the hospital. Cries of anger filled the street. "This is insane. She should be fired for this. She's costing someone their life." In that moment, Officer Angela Brown became the target of every ounce of frustration and fury. She heard the voices sharp, cutting, but she did not step aside. She kept her stance, both hands raised now, her boots firm on the icy asphalt. The ambulance revved its engine, the driver leaning on the horn. Behind the wheel, a shadow moved, but no one in the crowd paid much attention to it. All they saw was the woman standing against the machine that was supposed to be rushing someone to safety. Angela knew the truth, but she could not speak it yet. She could not shout over the sirens and the rage of the people. All she could do was hold her ground. The crowd grew bolder, some stepping off the curb, shouting insults. A man in a heavy coat cursed her, his voice hoarse with fury. A woman shook her head in disbelief, muttering that it was the coldest act she had ever witnessed. Phones kept recording. The images would spread within minutes. The world would see what was happening here, and they would not understand. Angela's eyes narrowed. She knew the storm that was about to break over her criticism, judgment, even betrayal from within her own department. Yet, none of it mattered compared to the decision she had already made. She could not let that ambulance pass. Behind the tinted glass of its back doors, hidden from the crowd, was not a patient fighting for life. Angela knew this. She had received the alert, the whispers from trusted sources that something was terribly wrong. The vehicle was not a lifeline that day. It was an escape route. The seconds stretched. The city seemed to hold its breath, the siren wailing, the shouts rising, the snow beginning to fall in thin, wet flakes. Angela Brown, alone in that intersection, was about to change everything. The sirens still echoed through the Cleveland streets long after the ambulance was forced to a halt, and the shouting of the crowd grew louder by the second. What had begun as murmurs of confusion turned into a storm of accusations. People pressed closer, their voices sharp and angry, their breath fogging the frigid air. "Move out of the way," a man bellowed, his fist raised in the air. "Somebody's dying in there. You're heartless," shouted a woman clutching a grocery bag. Others filmed, their camera lights reflecting on Angela's face, capturing her every expression. Angela stood still, her heart pounding in her chest, though her face betrayed none of it. Her training demanded composure, even as fear tugged at her insides. She knew how it looked, she knew how it would be twisted, but she also knew that if she faltered now, if she stepped aside even for a second, years of corruption would slip away into the shadows forever. The ambulance driver leaned out the window shouting, "Officer, what's the matter with you? We have no time. Move it." His voice was desperate, frantic. But Angela noticed something strange. The man's eyes flickered nervously toward the crowd, and then back to her. He wasn't pleading for a life inside that ambulance. He was pleading for the vehicle to be allowed to escape. Still, no one else saw it. Phones buzzed with notifications. Live streams captured the entire confrontation, broadcast instantly to social media platforms where strangers thousands of miles away could pass judgment with a flick of their thumbs. Within minutes, hashtags condemning Angela's actions began trending. "Cleveland cop blocks ambulance," one caption read. "Officer delays life-saving care for unknown reasons," screamed another. Comment sections overflowed. "She should lose her badge. Imagine if that was your family member inside. This is what's wrong with police in America." Angela felt the weight of those voices, though she hadn't read a single word yet. She could see it in the crowd's eyes, feel it in the hostility pressing closer, sense it in the way even some fellow officers on the perimeter shifted uneasily, unsure whether to back her or pull her away. Her radio crackled in her ear. "Brown, what's going on? Why are you stopping them?" It was Captain Jenkins, her superior, her voice sharp and demanding. Angela swallowed hard before answering. "Captain, the vehicle isn't what it looks like. Trust me, I need you to hold the perimeter." There was a long silence on the other end, then a clipped response. "This better be good, Brown. The whole city's watching." Angela lowered her hand, but she didn't move from the center of the lane. The ambulance's engine roared impatiently, the siren blasting again, drowning out some of the curses shouted her way. Children clutched their parents' coats, wide-eyed, confused. A few drivers who had pulled aside to clear the road began honking their horns in frustration, adding to the chaos. To the unknowing world, Angela was the villain in uniform, the one who had forgotten her oath to serve and protect. She remembered her daughter's face that morning, Sarah's shy smile as she adjusted her school bag, her questions about whether her mom would be home for dinner. Angela had promised she'd try. She always promised, even though she rarely could. Now she wondered if Sarah was hearing about this already, if someone at school was whispering about the officer on the news who had blocked an ambulance. The thought cut deeper than the insults ringing in her ears. Still, she didn't move. The first local news crew arrived within minutes, a van screeching to the curb, reporters tumbling out with cameras already rolling. The bright lights of their equipment illuminated the scene, broadcasting Angela's defiance to living rooms across Ohio. One reporter shouted over the chaos, pointing a microphone toward her. "Officer, why are you stopping life-saving care? Don't you realize someone could be dying in there?" Angela didn't respond. Anything she said would be twisted before the truth could be revealed. For now, silence was her shield. But her silence only fueled the fury. To the watching public, she looked cold, uncaring, maybe even cruel. The ambulance driver leaned on the horn again, pressing his advantage as the crowd shouted louder, as reporters demanded answers. Angela could almost feel the swell of opinion crashing against her like a tidal wave. But she remembered the whispered warning she had received the night before. A voice she trusted telling her that Deputy Chief Richard Hale was planning his escape, that he would use desperate measures to avoid facing the investigations closing in on him. The ambulance was his disguise. If she let it pass, if she stepped aside now, Hale and the evidence locked inside would vanish. And with him, so would the chance of justice for countless victims of his corruption. The moment stretched endlessly. By nightfall, the story was everywhere. Angela's image frozen in the glare of flashing lights. Her hand raised against the massive vehicle became a symbol, though no one yet knew what it truly meant. Talk shows debated her actions, some condemning, some speculating. Callers rang into radio stations, furious, demanding her suspension. Even her fellow officers whispered in hallways, uncertain whether to distance themselves or defend her. At home, Sarah sat cross-legged on the couch, the television blaring. Her small hands clutched a pillow tightly as her mother's face filled the screen. Tears welled in her eyes as she turned to the babysitter. "Why are they all yelling at my mom? She didn't do anything wrong." The babysitter didn't know what to say. Angela couldn't know it, but her daughter's world was unraveling under the weight of the same storm that surrounded her at the intersection. Meanwhile, Deputy Chief Hale sat quietly in the back of the ambulance, hidden behind tinted windows. His sharp eyes watched the commotion, the crowd, the officers scrambling. He almost smirked. He had counted on chaos, on outrage distracting everyone. He had counted on slipping through while the world focused on the wrong target. But he hadn't counted on Angela Brown. Angela didn't budge. Her boots were planted firmly, her breath steady, her gaze locked on the shadowy figure she knew was inside. She would not move, no matter how loud the crowd became. And outside, Cleveland seethed, the city's faith in justice hanging by a thread, not knowing that the very act they condemned might be the one thing standing between them and a truth too dark to imagine. By the following morning, Cleveland was still buzzing with outrage. The image of Officer Angela Brown standing in the middle of the icy street had been replayed endlessly across television screens, splashed across newspapers, and dissected on talk radio. In diners and offices, people shook their heads and muttered that the world had gone mad. To them, Angela had crossed a line that no officer should cross. The department's phone lines were jammed with complaints. Some called for her immediate suspension, others demanded her badge. Even fellow officers kept their distance at roll call, speaking in hushed tones, their eyes darting toward her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Angela felt the weight of it as she walked the halls, her uniform suddenly a mark of shame instead of pride. She kept her head high, but inside, her stomach churned. She thought of Sarah, who had refused to speak much the night before. The little girl's silence had cut deeper than any headline. Yet, beneath the storm of criticism, something else was stirring. Late that night, as Angela sat at her kitchen table with a cup of untouched coffee, her phone buzzed with an encrypted message. The sender was Michael Turner, a journalist she had crossed paths with once before during a community outreach program. He was known for digging into the city's darkest corners, a man who had burned more bridges than he had built, but whose work had exposed truths no one else dared touch. "Meet me. I know what's inside that ambulance." "You were right." Angela stared at the words, her pulse quickening. The next day, in a quiet corner booth of a diner on the edge of town, she met Turner. His coat was worn, his eyes restless as he slid into the booth opposite her. He wasted no time. "I've been tracking Hale for months," he whispered, leaning close. "Money laundering, ties to organized crime, payoffs from drug lords. I couldn't prove it until now. I had a source tell me he was being moved last night, not to a hospital, but out of the city. That ambulance was his escape." Angela's throat tightened. Hearing it out loud was both validation and a burden. She wasn't crazy. She hadn't jeopardized her career for nothing. Turner continued, pulling out a small recorder. "There's more. I've got conversations Hale talking with city officials, even a judge. If he gets out, all of it disappears. But if he's caught, this city finally sees the truth." "Oh." Angela's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her coffee mug. "You have to release this." "I will," Turner said. "But they'll come after me, and they'll come after you harder than ever. You've already been made the villain. The only thing standing between Hale and freedom is you." Her jaw tightened. She already knew that. The question was how long she could stand alone before the truth surfaced. Back at the precinct, Captain Laura Jenkins summoned Angela into her office. The blinds were half closed, the fluorescent light harsh overhead. Jenkins tapped a pen against a folder before speaking. "Angela, the mayor's office is furious. The chief's under pressure to suspend you. I'm holding them off. But you need to give me something. Why the hell did you stop that ambulance?" Angela looked into her captain's eyes, weighing whether to reveal the full truth. If she spoke now, Hale's allies could bury it before it reached the public. But if she stayed silent, Jenkins might cut her loose. "I can't tell you everything yet," Angela said carefully. "But I swear to you, I did what was necessary. If that vehicle had passed, the damage to this city would have been irreversible." Jenkins studied her for a long moment, frustration etched into her features. Finally, she leaned back in her chair. "You're putting me in a damn impossible position, Brown. But something in your eyes tells me you're not wrong. I'll give you a little more time. Don't make me regret it." Angela nodded, a flicker of relief warming her chest. But she knew time was running out. That evening, as snow fell softly over the city, Angela drove home, her headlights cutting through the mist. Sarah sat in the back seat, unusually quiet, her gaze fixed on the frost gathering on the window. Finally, she spoke. "Mom, why do people hate you now?" Angela's throat tightened. She gripped the steering wheel harder. "They don't hate me, sweetheart. They just don't understand yet." Sarah's small voice trembled. "At school, kids said you stopped someone from being saved. They said you're a bad cop." Angela's heart shattered. She pulled the car over, turning to face her daughter. "Listen to me, Sarah. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't look right at first. Sometimes people will get mad before they know the truth. But you have to believe me, I would never hurt anyone. I'm trying to protect people, even if they don't see it right now." Sarah's eyes welled with tears, but she nodded slowly, clinging to her mother's words. That night, Angela couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the snow blanket the city, her thoughts heavy with doubt and fear. Every choice she made seemed to cost her something: her reputation, her daughter's peace, her future in the department. But she also knew that if she backed down, Cleveland would continue to rot under the weight of Hale's corruption. And then came the turning point. 2 days after the incident, the footage from the ambulance's own dashboard camera was leaked anonymous, but clearly deliberate. The video revealed the back of the vehicle, not filled with medical equipment, but with files, briefcases, and the unmistakable face of Deputy Chief Richard Hale, seated calmly in the rear. The city erupted. News anchors scrambled to update their coverage. Headlines shifted overnight. Ambulance cover, up exposed. Officer Brown vindicated. Corruption in Cleveland PD unraveled. The tide was turning, but with it came new danger. Angela noticed the black sedan parked near her street that evening, its engine idling, its windows dark. When she stepped outside to check her mailbox, the vehicle pulled away slowly, deliberately. A chill ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the winter air. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Turner. "They know we're on to them. Be careful." Angela stood on her porch, staring into the darkness, the snowflakes catching in her hair. She had survived the fury of the public, but now she was stepping into a deeper storm, the wrath of men who would do anything to keep their secrets buried. And she knew, in her heart, the real battle had only just begun. The storm outside Angela's window was nothing compared to the storm gathering within the city. The leaked dashboard footage had cracked the facade wide open. For the first time, the public saw Deputy Chief Richard Hale not as a respected officer, but as a man trying to flee justice. The outrage that once burned against Angela now turned toward Hale. Newspapers demanded answers. Local talk shows were flooded with callers, furious that the very man meant to uphold the law had manipulated it for his escape. Citizens marched outside the precinct with signs calling for accountability, but corruption did not crumble easily. Inside the department, loyalties were split. Some officers whispered their support for Angela in hallways, nodding at her silently as she passed. Others avoided her, their faces tight with fear, as though even standing near her might mark them for retribution. Hale had built his network carefully over decades, officers, judges, politicians. The man's reach was longer than most dared imagine. Angela felt it in the way certain colleagues no longer met her eyes. She saw it in the subtle glances exchanged when she entered a room. She heard it in the silence that followed her name. The black sedan returned the next night. This time, it parked directly across the street from her home, engine off, windows dark. Angela watched from her kitchen window, her hand resting on the curtain. Sarah was in her bedroom, asleep, her soft breathing drifting down the hallway. Angela's heart pounded. She picked up the phone and dialed Captain Jenkins. "They're watching my house," Angela said quietly. Jenkins exhaled sharply. "Do you have plates?" "Number they're covered. But it's them. They want me to know I'm being watched." There was a pause. "I'll send a unit by. But, Angela, listen carefully. You need to tread lightly. Hale still has allies in high places. Until he's formally charged, you're a threat to their entire machine." Angela's grip tightened on the phone. "So I'm supposed to just let them intimidate me? Let them scare my daughter?" "You're supposed to stay alive," Jenkins said firmly. "Don't underestimate these men. They've silenced people before." "Oh," Angela set the phone down, staring out at the silent car until it finally rolled away into the night. She knew Jenkins was right, but fear was not enough to make her surrender. The following day, Michael Turner called her to meet again, this time in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was freezing inside, the air filled with the scent of rust and old wood. Turner arrived with a briefcase and a nervous look. "They've tightened their grip," he said. The footage leak rattled them, but Hale's still pulling strings. "He's got friends trying to bury the story, claiming the video's doctored. We need something more solid." Angela crossed her arms. "What do you have?" Turner opened the case, revealing folders stuffed with documents, photographs, and transcripts. "These are bank records, payoffs routed through shell companies. Some of them tie directly back to Hale, and there's more wiretaps from a confidential source. Enough to put him away for years, if we can get it into the right hands." Angela's eyes scanned the papers. It was damning, but fragile. If this evidence vanished, so would their chance. Turner leaned in, his voice low. "But Angela, they know about me now. I've had my tires slashed. Someone followed me last night. If they silence me, this dies with me. You need to decide how far you're willing to go." Angela closed the folder, her resolve hardening. "As far as it takes." Oh, that night, the threat became real. Angela was walking to her car in the precinct parking lot when she felt a presence behind her, footsteps too deliberate. She turned sharply, her hand instinctively going to her weapon. A man in a dark coat stood in the shadows, his face hidden. "You should have let that ambulance pass," he said, his voice cold. Angela kept her stance firm, her hand steady. "You picked the wrong officer to scare." The man chuckled, stepping closer. "We don't need to scare you, Brown. We just need to remind you what's at stake. That little girl of yours, pretty kid. Be a shame if she got caught up in something she didn't understand." Angela's blood ran cold. Rage surged through her, but she held it back, forcing her voice steady. If you or anyone touches my daughter, I swear. Or what? The man interrupted smoothly. You'll shoot me here, in the parking lot of your own station? Think carefully, officer. We've been in this city longer than you. We know how to make people disappear. Before Angela could react, headlights swept across the lot. Another officer pulled in, and the man melted into the shadows, vanishing as quickly as he appeared. Angela stood frozen, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. For the first time, she realized the depth of what she was facing. This wasn't just about her career. It wasn't even just about Hale. This was a war against a network that thrived in darkness, one willing to use her daughter as leverage. When she got home that night, Sarah was already asleep. Angela stood in the doorway of her daughter's room, watching her small chest rise and fall. The thought of harm coming to her made Angela's resolve burn hotter than ever. She whispered into the stillness, "They won't touch you, I promise." But she knew promises alone wouldn't be enough. The next morning, she drove not to the precinct, but to Turner's office. She laid the folders on his desk, her eyes fierce. "We take this public," she said. "No more waiting, no more hiding. If we let them control the narrative, they win. We put this in the hands of the people." Turner hesitated. "Angela, once we do this, there's no going back. You'll be hunted harder than ever." "I already am," Angela replied. "But if we don't act now, everything we've done so far will be for nothing." Turner studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, let's burn their empire down." As the two of them began to prepare, Cleveland buzzed with rumors. Some still clung to the belief that Angela was reckless, that her actions endangered lives. Others now called her brave, even heroic. But in the shadows of the city, men loyal to Hale sharpened their knives. Angela Brown was no longer just a police officer standing in the middle of the road. She had become the single barrier between corruption and exposure. And the men she stood against had just made it clear they would stop at nothing to break her. The morning sun rose weakly over Cleveland, filtered through gray clouds that refused to let the city see a clear sky. Angela sat in her patrol car outside a small independent radio station, her fingers drumming nervously against the steering wheel. Inside the passenger seat was the folder Turner had given her: documents, transcripts, and photographs that could rip the city's leadership apart. Turner had insisted this was the safest outlet. "The big stations are too controlled," he had explained. "They'll bury it. But this one will put it out raw, without edits, and the people will run with it." Angela stared at the folder. She thought of Sarah, of the threat whispered in the precinct parking lot. She thought of Hale's shadowy network, watching her every move. And she thought of the people who still cursed her name in grocery stores, convinced she had nearly killed someone by blocking that ambulance. This was her chance to turn the tide, or to lose everything. Inside, Turner was already waiting, pacing near the sound booth. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly, but his eyes burned with determination. "You ready?" he asked as she entered. Angela nodded once, firmly. "Let's do it." The broadcast began shortly after noon. The host, a sharp-tongued man named Carl Simmons, introduced Angela with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. "Folks, you all know her face by now. Officer Angela Brown, the cop who stood in front of an ambulance. Today, she says she's got a story that'll explain everything. Let's hear it." Angela's voice was steady, though inside she was bracing for the backlash. She laid out the facts carefully, piece by piece. The video of Hale in the ambulance. The evidence Turner had collected: bank records, wiretaps, transcripts of meetings that linked Hale to organized crime and payoffs. She spoke of the threats, of the car parked outside her home, of the corruption that had burrowed deep into the city's veins. By the time she finished, the studio phone lines were jammed. Some callers shouted support, praising her courage. Others still doubted her, accusing her of fabricating a story to cover her mistake. But the evidence Turner released on the station's website spoke louder than words. Documents, photos, and audio clips were shared across the city within hours, then across the country by evening. the tide began to shift. National networks picked up the story, replaying the damning audio of Hale arranging payments with a known gang leader. Newspapers ran headlines that screamed of betrayal. Deputy chief caught in criminal web. Whistleblower cop vindicated. Angela's phone buzzed endlessly with messages, some of support, some of hate, and some darker still. Anonymous numbers left voicemails filled with threats. You should have stayed quiet. Think about your kid before you go any further. Her hands shook as she deleted each one, but her resolve only hardened. That night, as she tucked Sarah into bed, the little girl looked up at her with wide, uncertain eyes. "Mom, are you in trouble?" Angela knelt by her side, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. "Yes, honey, but it's the kind of trouble that comes when you're fighting for what's right. I need you to be brave with me." Sarah nodded slowly, clutching her stuffed rabbit tighter. "I'll be brave if you're brave." "Oh," Angela kissed her forehead, whispering a silent promise she prayed she could keep. Meanwhile, in the darker corners of Cleveland, Hale's allies regrouped. The evidence was powerful, yes, but it wasn't yet airtight in court. They still had leveraged judges who owed favors, officers who would look the other way, politicians who had profited from Hale's schemes, and above all, they had fear. Fear was a weapon, and Angela had just painted a target on herself. 2 nights later, Turner's office was broken into. Papers were scattered, drawers ripped open, hard drives stolen. Turner called Angela in a panic. "They're trying to erase everything. If we lose the originals, it's just our word against theirs." Angela rushed to meet him, the weight of the situation pressing down like lead. "Then we make more copies. Spread them wider. The more people who see this, the harder it is to bury." But Turner's voice cracked with exhaustion. "Angela, they're not just coming for the papers anymore. They're coming for us. They'll ruin you. They'll ruin me. They'll—" Angela cut him off sharply. "They already tried. They threatened my daughter. Do you think I can back down now? This isn't about us anymore, Michael. It's about every honest cop who's been silenced. Every family torn apart by crime that Hale helped fuel. If we quit now, we hand the city back to them." Turner stared at her, then nodded reluctantly. "All right, we go louder." And louder they went. The following morning, Turner released a special report on his independent website, backed by Angela's testimony. The evidence was laid bare: scans of bank statements, transcripts of phone calls, photos of Hale in meetings with known criminals. It was impossible to ignore. Cleveland erupted. Citizens gathered outside City Hall, demanding resignations. The mayor held a shaky press conference, promising a full and impartial investigation, though his eyes betrayed the fear of a man whose own name might soon surface in the files. National outlets flew in reporters, swarming the streets for interviews with neighbors, officers, anyone connected to Angela. And yet, the more the truth spread, the more dangerous it became for Angela. Her tires were slashed in the precinct parking lot. Anonymous notes appeared in her mailbox, crude drawings of her daughter, threats scrawled in black ink. One evening, as she walked to her car, she found a dead crow on her windshield, its wings pinned open. Angela picked it up with gloved hands, her jaw tight, her heart burning with both fear and fury. She wasn't naive, she knew the message. But instead of retreating, she drove straight to Captain Jenkins' office. "They're escalating," she said, placing the note and the crow feathers on the desk. "If you don't step in now, someone's going to get hurt." Jenkins looked at her grimly. "Angela, I believe you, but I have superiors breathing down my neck. You've made enemies in places you don't even realize." Angela leaned forward, her voice fierce. "Then maybe it's time someone stopped protecting them. Maybe it's time we took our department back." Jenkins studied her for a long moment, then finally nodded. "All right, but understand this, you're walking into a fire. Once we move, there's no going back." Angela's eyes blazed with determination. "I've been in the fire since the day I stepped in front of that ambulance. I'm not backing out now." That night, as snow fell thick and heavy over the city, Angela sat by her window, watching the lights flicker across the skyline. Somewhere out there, Hale and his allies were plotting their next move. Somewhere out there, men with knives and guns whispered her name in the dark. But she was ready. Because Cleveland wasn't just watching anymore, the whole country was. And Angela Brown had become more than just an officer. She had become a symbol, a reminder that even in the face of power, fear, and corruption, one person's stand could shake an empire. The snow had turned to slush by the weekend, but the chill in Cleveland was more than weather. It was tension, thick and bitter, running through every street and office in the city. After Turner's explosive report, the city was in turmoil. Citizens marched, demanding justice. National news trucks clogged the precinct parking lot. And at the center of it all stood Angela Brown, the officer who had once been reviled, now reluctantly hailed as a whistleblower. But Hale was not finished. Behind the walls of a private club tucked away near Lake Erie, he sat surrounded by men whose suits were too expensive and smiles too polished. These were the men who had profited alongside him, the businessmen, the judges, the politicians who had fed off the same corrupt stream for years. Hale's calm mask hid a storm, but his voice was steady as he spoke. She's not just an officer anymore. She's become an idea. If we don't cut her down now, she'll drag us all into the light. How well? One of the judges leaned forward, his hands trembling slightly. But the evidence, those files, those tapes, it's damning, Richard. The people won't forget. Hale's lips curved into a thin smile. People forget everything if you scare them enough. We don't need to erase her evidence. We just need to erase her credibility. And if that fails, we erase her. The room fell silent. They all knew what that meant. Back in her modest Cleveland home, Angela sensed the storm building. She had barely slept, her body wired with constant vigilance. Every noise outside made her rise from bed. She had begun sleeping with her service weapon within arm's reach, a habit she hated but couldn't avoid. Sarah noticed. One night, as Angela tucked her in, the girl whispered, "Mom, are the bad people coming for us?" Angela forced a smile, smoothing her daughter's blanket. "No, sweetheart, you're safe, I promise." But deep inside, she wondered if she could keep that promise. 2 nights later, the attack came. Angela was driving home from a late shift when headlights suddenly appeared in her rearview mirror. Too close, too aggressive. She turned down a side street, but the vehicle followed. Her grip on the wheel tightened. She reached for her radio, but before she could speak, the car behind rammed into her bumper, jolting her forward. Her tires screeched against the icy pavement as she fought to control the car. Another hit from behind, harder this time, sent sparks flying as metal scraped against concrete barriers. Her training kicked in. Angela swerved sharply, forcing the pursuing sedan into a snowbank. But even as she accelerated away, she knew this was only the beginning. At the precinct, Captain Jenkins listened grimly as Angela described the incident. "They tried to kill me," Angela said, her voice low but steady, "and they'll try again." Jenkins leaned back, her eyes weary but determined. "Then we stop playing defense. If Hale wants a war, let's give him one." For the first time, Angela saw her captain not just as a superior officer, but as an ally. The next move came quickly. One morning, headlines screamed, "Officer Brown under investigation for misconduct." Anonymous sources claimed she had falsified reports, mishandled arrests, even stolen evidence. Old cases were dredged up, twisted and distorted, until the picture painted was of a crooked cop hiding behind fake heroics. Angela's stomach churned as she read the articles. She knew exactly who was behind them. Hale's allies were smearing her name, poisoning the public's faith before the evidence against him could solidify in court. Turner stormed into her apartment that afternoon, waving a copy of the paper. "This is classic misdirection. They can't kill the evidence, so they're trying to kill you in the press." Angela set the paper down, her jaw tightening. "Then we need to push harder. We need something they can't twist, something undeniable." Turner hesitated, then pulled out a small cassette tape. "I've been holding on to this. A source got me audio of Hale himself admitting to the ambulance escape. It's risky if I release this. My source is burned. But it might be the nail in his coffin." Angela stared at the tape, the weight of it heavy. Do it. We don't have time for half measures anymore. That night, the tape was released. The voice of Richard Hale filled radios and televisions across the city, unmistakable, calm, and damning. The ambulance is the safest way out. No one will dare stop it. The city exploded. Crowds doubled in size, gathering at City Hall, demanding Hale's arrest. Federal investigators arrived, suddenly very visible, promising action. For the first time, Hale's armor cracked. But desperation is dangerous. Late that night, Angela awoke to the sound of shattering glass. She grabbed her weapon, heart pounding, as footsteps creaked across her living room floor. She moved silently, training guiding her every motion. A shadow loomed near the hallway, large, deliberate. "Mom?" Sarah's frightened voice whispered from her bedroom. Angela froze. The intruder turned at the sound, and Angela fired. The man dropped, his weapon clattering against the hardwood floor. Another figure bolted through the broken window, vanishing into the night. Angela rushed to Sarah's room, pulling her daughter into her arms. The child was trembling, eyes wide with terror. Angela whispered fiercely, "It's okay, baby. I've got you." But even as she said the words, Angela knew the truth. This war had crossed into her home. The police arrived within minutes, sirens wailing. Jenkins was among them, her expression grim as she surveyed the scene. "They're not just trying to scare you anymore," Jenkins said. "They want you gone." Angela's eyes hardened. "Then they'll have to come through me." She held Sarah close, her daughter's small hands clutching her uniform. Fear was there, yes, but so was fire. The attacks, the smears, the threats, they had only sharpened her resolve. Richard Hale and his empire had declared war, and Angela Brown was ready to fight back with everything she had. Cleveland awoke to news of the attempted break-in at Officer Angela Brown's home. Local channels ran the story, shaky camera footage showing shattered glass and yellow police tape stretched across her modest front porch. For many, it was the first undeniable sign that Angela was not the villain of the ambulance standoff, but the target of something larger, darker. The city was no longer divided. It was unsettled. Angela sat in Captain Jenkins' office later that morning, Sarah at home with a trusted neighbor. The captain leaned forward, hands folded, eyes sharp. "You've been standing alone too long," Jenkins said. "If we're going to bring Hale down, we need to move as a unit. He's got friends in places we can't touch alone, but we can hit him where he's weakest with exposure and pressure." Angela nodded slowly. "So what's the plan?" Jenkins glanced toward the door, making sure it was shut. "We form a team officers we can trust, the feds who've stepped in, and Turner with his evidence. We go after Hale's network piece by piece, freeze his accounts, pull his allies into the light. If we squeeze him hard enough, he'll make a mistake." Angela's pulse quickened. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel isolated. "Then let's start squeezing." The alliance began quietly. Jenkins called in 2 detectives she trusted, men with reputations for honesty, even in a city that often punished it. Turner brought in a digital forensics expert who could authenticate the audio tapes and track the money trails Hale had tried to bury. Angela herself mapped out connections within the department names she suspected were still loyal to Hale. They met in the basement of the radio station, away from curious eyes. The group sat around a battered wooden table, stacks of documents spread between them. Turner tapped a file with a pen. "This shows payments from a shell company in Chicago tied directly to Hale. If we can prove these funds were funneled through his office, it's game over." One of the detectives, a grizzled veteran named Donnelly, shook his head. "You don't just prove something like this overnight. These guys are slippery. We need them to trip themselves." "Oh." Angela leaned forward, her voice steady. "Then we push him, force him into a corner until he exposes himself." Jenkins gave a tight smile. "That's the spirit." But pushing Hale was dangerous. Within days, smear campaigns intensified. Anonymous letters claimed Angela had been having affairs with criminals she arrested. Fake reports surfaced, accusing Turner of fabricating evidence for profit. Even Jenkins found her name dragged through whispers of misconduct. Still, the alliance pressed on. Angela worked long nights, combing through records, tracing suspicious transfers, connecting dots that others had ignored. Turner published carefully timed articles, each revealing a new piece of the puzzle small enough not to burn his sources, strong enough to keep public outrage alive. Jenkins quietly reassigned officers she suspected of leaking to Hale, thinning the circle of corruption inside the precinct. And slowly, cracks began to show. One afternoon, Angela received a call from an unexpected source, an officer who had once sneered at her in the hallways. His voice was shaky. "I can't do this anymore," he confessed. "Hale's been paying me off for years, but now I've got kids. I don't want them growing up knowing their father sold out his badge. I'll talk." Angela arranged the meeting in secret, listening as the man spilled details, names of judges, drop-off points, coded language used in reports. It was the kind of testimony that could break the dam. That night, she met Turner and Jenkins in the station basement. She laid the officer's statement on the table. "This is it," Angela said. "If we combine this with the bank records, the audio tapes, the testimony, we don't just have Hale. We have his entire machine." Turner's eyes lit with determination. "Then it's time to go public in a way they can't suppress. We take it national. I've got contacts at the Times. Once this hits, it won't matter how many judges he owns here. The whole country will be watching." Jenkins nodded. "And while the press is hammering him, we'll move on his accounts. If we freeze his money, his allies will scatter. Corruption doesn't stay loyal when the cash runs dry." Angela sat back, feeling something she hadn't felt in weeks: hope. But hope was fragile. The following evening, Angela left the precinct with Jenkins when shots rang out from across the street. Both women dove for cover, glass shattering above their heads. Tires screeched as a dark car sped away into the night. Breathless, Angela pressed her back against the brick wall, heart pounding. Jenkins cursed under her breath. "They're getting desperate," Jenkins muttered, "which means we're close." Angela wiped blood from a shallow cut on her forehead, her eyes blazing. "Then let's finish this." Days later, the plan went into motion. Turner's expose hit the front page of the New York Times. Cleveland Deputy Chief linked to National Crime Syndicate. The article laid everything bare: bank records, testimonies, wiretaps, even Hale's own voice captured on tape. The country erupted in outrage. Politicians scrambled to distance themselves. Meanwhile, Jenkins and her trusted detectives coordinated with federal agents. Warrants were signed. Accounts were frozen. Businesses tied to Hale were raided. His empire began to crumble. Angela was there through it all, on raids, in strategy meetings, in late-night sessions combing through files. She barely saw Sarah, but every time she did, the little girl looked at her with something new in her eyes. Not just fear, but pride. Still, Hale did not fall. He remained free, his lawyers maneuvering, his allies shielding him. And in the shadows, he plotted. Angela knew it. She could feel it in her bones. One night, as she drove home past the lakefront, her phone buzzed with a blocked number. She answered, her gut tightening. A familiar voice slid through the line. "Hale's. You've made quite the mess, Officer Brown. But don't fool yourself. Empires don't fall to little women with loud voices. They fall when men like me decide they're finished. And I'm not finished." Angela gripped the phone tighter, her voice calm despite the chill racing down her spine. "Then you'd better get used to losing, because your empire is already in flames." Hale chuckled darkly. "We'll see about that. Be careful who you trust, Angela. Not all of your allies are as loyal as you think." The line went dead. Angela stared at the phone, her pulse hammering. She knew the fight was far from over, but now she wasn't standing alone. For the first time, Hale wasn't just facing one determined officer. He was facing a united front: Angela, Jenkins, Turner, and a city that was slowly waking up to the truth. And Angela Brown was ready to take the fight all the way to the end. The city of Cleveland seemed to hold its breath. For weeks, the pressure had mounted, layer upon layer, until the whole town felt ready to crack. Hale's empire was shrinking under the spotlight of national attention. His accounts were frozen, his allies nervous. And yet, he was still free, still untouchable, still whispering threats from the shadows. Angela could feel the tension everywhere she went. At the precinct, the halls were quieter, the stairs sharper. In coffee shops and grocery stores, strangers recognized her, some offering nods of gratitude, others muttering that she was dragging the city into chaos. Even at home, Sarah sensed the unease, clinging to her mother's hand when they walked together. But it was in the basement of the radio station, where their small alliance gathered, that the strain showed most clearly. Papers littered the table, maps of financial networks, transcripts of wiretaps. The room smelled of coffee and exhaustion. Turner slammed his fist onto the table. "It's not enough. We've got the evidence, we've got the public. But Hale's still out there sipping whiskey in his damn penthouse. Why isn't he behind bars?" Detective Donnelly, the veteran Angela had come to trust, rubbed his temples. "Because his lawyers are faster than the system. Every warrant we get, they tie up in court. Every raid, they claim procedural errors. It's like fighting a ghost wrapped in money." Angela sat back, eyes narrowing. Then maybe Hale was right. Empires don't fall unless someone inside decides to help tear them down. We need a crack in his inner circle. It was then that another detective, a younger officer named Harris, spoke up. I might know someone. Hale's driver. He's been with him for years, but lately he's scared. I think he'd talk if we offered him protection." The room buzzed with cautious hope. They arranged the meeting at a diner on the city's west side, a quiet place where truckers sipped coffee and snow blew in through the cracked door. Angela and Jenkins waited in a corner booth, watching as Harris arrived with a nervous man in his 50s. The driver's hands trembled as he stirred his coffee, glancing at the door every few seconds. "I can't do this," he muttered. "If Hale finds out—" Angela leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "He will find out. The question is whether you want to go down with him or stand on the right side when this is over." The man's eyes darted to Jenkins, then back to Angela. Finally, he exhaled, defeated. "He's planning something big, a move to shut all of you down. Said he's got someone close feeding him everything you're doing." Angela's stomach tightened. "Someone close? Who?" The driver shook his head. "Didn't say, but he laughed about it. Said he had a mole in your little crusade." "Highwar." Angela's blood ran cold. She glanced at Jenkins, who kept her expression neutral, though her jaw was tight. When the meeting ended, Angela walked out into the snowy night, her mind racing. Someone in their group, someone she trusted, was feeding Hale information. The betrayal revealed itself sooner than she expected. 3 days later, as Turner prepared another explosive report, his office was raided not by masked intruders this time, but by uniformed officers with a warrant. They seized his computers, his files, everything he had gathered. Turner stormed into the basement that night, wild-eyed. They knew exactly what to take. They went straight for the hard drives, the backups. This wasn't random. Someone told them where to look. Angela's gut twisted. She scanned the faces around the table: Jenkins, Donnelly, Harris, the forensics expert Turner had brought. Any of them could have leaked. Jenkins slammed her hand on the table. "Whoever it is, they're bleeding us dry. We can't move until we root them out." But rooting out a traitor meant sowing distrust, and distrust ate at the alliance like rust. Every conversation grew sharper, every glance heavier. Turner accused Donnelly of dragging his feet on raids. Harris avoided eye contact. Even Jenkins seemed distant, buried in her thoughts. Angela felt the foundation cracking beneath her feet. Meanwhile, Hale struck harder. Billboards appeared overnight. Angela Brown, hero or liar? Talk radio hosts speculated that she was using the chaos to build her own fame. Anonymous callers flooded news shows, spreading rumors that she had orchestrated the ambulance stunt to frame Hale. Then came the subpoena. Angela was ordered to testify in front of a city tribunal, accused of misconduct and insubordination. It was a clear move to discredit her, to paint her as unstable before the public. The night before the hearing, Angela sat at her kitchen table, Sarah asleep upstairs. Turner sat across from her. papers spread between them. "They're tightening the noose," he said grimly. "If they bury you tomorrow, Hale walks free." Angela rubbed her eyes, exhaustion weighing on her. "Then I tell the truth. Nothing else matters." Turner leaned closer. "The truth isn't always enough, Angela. Not when the system is built to choke it." She looked at him, her face resolute. "Then we'll tear the system apart if we have to." The hearing was brutal. Angela sat under the harsh fluorescent lights, facing a panel of officials, some of whom she knew were tied to Hale. They questioned her relentlessly, twisting her actions, painting her as reckless, dangerous. "Why did you stop the ambulance, Officer Brown? Do you admit that your actions could have cost a life? Are you motivated by personal vendetta against Deputy Chief Hale?" Angela answered calmly, truthfully, but she could feel the trap closing. Each word she spoke seemed to be spun into another accusation. The crowd in the chamber murmured, divided, some nodding in support, others shaking their heads. Then, just as the panel pressed hardest, a voice rang out from the back of the chamber. It was Harris, the young detective. He stepped forward, holding a file. "This hearing is a sham," he said loudly, "and I can prove it." Gasps filled the room as Harris laid the file on the panel's table. Inside were documents, copies of Hale's payments to city officials, names, amounts, dates. The very people questioning Angela were on the payroll. Chaos erupted. Reporters rushed forward, cameras flashing. The panel tried to silence Harris, but the evidence was already in the hands of the press. Angela sat frozen, her heart pounding. For a moment she thought Harris had betrayed them, but in the end he had risked everything to expose the real traitors. That night, Cleveland was on fire with news. Hale's web was unraveling faster than ever. Officials resigned. Judges were questioned. The city that once doubted Angela now began to see her as the officer who stood against corruption when no one else would. But Hale was not finished. Angela returned home to find her front door ajar, the lock broken. She rushed inside, weapon drawn, calling for Sarah. The house was empty. Too empty. Panic surged through her veins as she tore through every room, shouting her daughter's name. On the kitchen table, a single note lay waiting. "You want to fight? Then let's fight. RH." Angela collapsed against the counter, her hands trembling, her vision blurring with fury and terror. Hale had made his move. This was no longer about justice. It was personal. And Angela knew she was about to walk into the darkest fight of her life. The note burned in Angela's hands as though the ink itself carried Hale's malice. "You want to fight? Then let's fight." The three words carved themselves into her heart like a blade. Her little girl was gone, snatched away as casually as a pawn removed from a chessboard. For the first time since the ambulance incident, Angela felt her knees weaken. She dropped into a chair, her breath shallow, her mind racing. Fear clawed at her chest. Sarah's laugh, Sarah's soft voice whispering goodnight. Were those now just memories? But fear quickly hardened into fire. Angela rose, gripping the note with white-knuckled fists. Hale thought he had found her breaking point. Instead, he had given her something sharper than any weapon, unyielding purpose. She called Jenkins first. The captain answered on the second ring, her voice weary but urgent. "They've got Sarah," Angela said, her tone flat, controlled only by sheer will. "Hale has my daughter." A heavy silence filled the line. Then Jenkins spoke, voice low. "We'll get her back, Angela. I swear it. Where are you?" "Home," Angela replied. "But I'm not staying put. I'm coming for her." "Don't go alone," Jenkins warned. "That's what he wants. We'll pull resources." "There's no time," Angela snapped, her voice cracking. Every second she's with him, she forced herself to stop, to breathe. "Send me what you have. Anything. I'll move first. You follow." Turner arrived minutes later, his car screeching into the driveway. He rushed inside, his face pale. "They hit me too," he said breathlessly. "Broke into my apartment. Took files, smashed everything. But this," he pulled out a flash drive from his pocket. "This survived. It's got GPS logs from Hale's convoy. If he's hiding Sarah anywhere, it's one of these sites." Angela plugged the drive into her laptop. Coordinates lit up the screen. mapping Hale's movements over the past month: warehouses, abandoned docks, private estates. One location repeated more than the rest: an old factory on the edge of the Cuyahoga River. "That's where he is," Angela whispered. The factory loomed like a skeleton against the snowy skyline, its broken windows glowing faintly with scattered lights inside. Angela parked 2 blocks away, slipping her badge into her coat pocket. Tonight, she wasn't here as a cop. She was here as a mother. Turner insisted on coming with her, though his hands shook as he gripped a flashlight. "You're not going in there alone," he said firmly. Angela checked her weapon, her voice steady. "Stay behind me. If things go south, you get Sarah out. That's your only job." They moved silently through the shadows, boots crunching over frozen gravel, the sound of water lapping against the river mixed with the hum of generators inside the factory. Angela's senses sharpened every creak, every flicker of light a warning. They slipped through a side entrance, the air thick with the stench of oil and rust. The vast interior stretched into darkness, pillars and catwalks silhouetted by dim overhead bulbs. Then she heard Sarah's voice, muffled, trembling. "Mommy." The sound nearly broke Angela's composure. She motioned for Turner to stay low as she followed the voice, her heart pounding with both terror and resolve. At the far end of the factory, a makeshift office had been set up with metal chairs and a table. And there he was, Richard Hale, standing tall in a tailored coat despite the cold, his silver hair catching the dim light. Beside him, 2 men in black jackets flanked Sarah, who sat tied to a chair, her eyes wide with fear. Angela stepped forward, her weapon raised. "Let her go, Hale." Hale turned, a smile curling his lips. "Ah, the hero arrives. I was beginning to think you'd lost your nerve." Sarah whimpered, struggling against the ropes. Angela's chest ached, but she kept her focus. "This ends tonight," Angela said, her voice like steel. "You've bled this city dry, threatened everyone who stood in your way. But you made one mistake: you touched my daughter." Hale chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You think this is about your daughter? She's just leverage, Angela, a reminder that you're not invincible. Heroes fall, and when they do, the city forgets them quickly." Angela's grip tightened on her weapon. "Not this time." She fired. The bullet struck the ground inches from Hale's foot, sending a crack echoing through the factory. His guards tensed, raising their weapons, but Hale lifted a hand to stop them. "You won't shoot me," Hale said calmly, "because you're still clinging to that badge in your pocket, to the idea that the law matters, but the law bends to power, and I am power." Angela took a step closer, her eyes blazing. "Number, you're just a man who thinks he's untouchable, but tonight you're nothing but a criminal with nowhere left to hide." "How?" Before Hale could respond, Turner lunged forward, swinging his flashlight at one of the guards. The man stumbled, giving Angela the split-second distraction she needed. She fired again, striking the second guard in the shoulder. Chaos erupted. Sarah screamed as Hale grabbed her arm, pulling her close like a shield. "One more step, Brown, and she pays the price," he snarled. Angela froze, her gun trained on him, every muscle taut. Then Sarah, with trembling courage, bit Hale's hand hard enough to make him cry out. In that instant, Angela surged forward, tackling him to the ground. The weapon skittered across the floor. Hale fought viciously, years of authority fueling his rage, but Angela's fury was stronger. She pinned him, her knee against his chest, her weapon pressed against his temple. "For every life you ruined," she hissed, "for every family you tore apart, you answer now." Hale sneered, even as blood trickled from his lip. "You think the world will thank you? They'll forget you tomorrow. But me? My name will live in whispers long after you're gone." Angela's finger hovered on the trigger. For one terrifying second, she considered ending it herself, but Sarah's tear-streaked face pulled her back. Number Hale would not escape through death. He would rot, exposed and powerless, under the weight of his own crimes. Angela cuffed him with trembling hands, yanking him to his feet. "You're finished." By the time Jenkins and the backup team arrived, Angela stood with Sarah clutched against her chest, Hale shackled beside her. Turner leaned against a wall, bruised but breathing, his flashlight dented from the struggle. Jenkins' eyes widened as she took in the scene. "You actually did it." Angela held her daughter tighter, whispering into her hair. "It's over, baby. It's over." But deep inside, she knew it wasn't over yet. Hale's empire might crumble, but the scars of the battle would remain. For her, for Sarah, for the city. Still, as the flashing lights of patrol cars painted the snowy night, Angela allowed herself a moment of relief. She had faced corruption, betrayal, and fear. She had risked everything, and when it mattered most, she had not faltered. Sarah looked up at her, eyes shining with both tears and admiration. "You saved me, Mommy." Angela kissed her forehead. "Always." "Andretti." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Angela allowed herself to believe it. The morning after Hale's arrest, Cleveland awoke to a city transformed. Headlines screamed across every front page. Deputy Chief Richard Hale, arrested in dramatic raid. Officer Angela Brown rescues daughter, captures city's most powerful man. The same news anchors who had once condemned Angela now praised her courage. Talk shows replayed footage of Hale being led in cuffs, his face twisted in rage, Angela's hand steady on his shoulder. To the public, it was the ending they craved, the villain captured, the hero vindicated. But Angela knew better. In the sterile light of the precinct conference room, she sat with Captain Jenkins and federal investigators. Files were spread across the table, maps of Hale's financial networks, photographs of his meetings, lists of names, judges, business leaders, politicians. The empire wasn't gone. It was only beginning to unravel. "We've got Hale," one agent said, tapping a folder. "But this goes deeper. He wasn't working alone. We need you, Officer Brown, to testify. Your account of the ambulance stop, the threats, the kidnapping. It's crucial." Angela's jaw tightened. Testify. The word meant more hearings, more cameras, more chances for Hale's allies to smear her. But she nodded. "I'll do it, whatever it takes." The trial began 2 months later in a packed courthouse downtown. Snow still clung to the sidewalks, though spring was beginning to creep into the air. Reporters filled the steps, microphones thrust toward anyone connected to the case. Angela walked through the throng with Sarah's small hand clasped tightly in hers, Jenkins on the other side. Cameras flashed, voices shouted questions. "Officer Brown, do you feel vindicated? Are you afraid for your daughter's safety? Do you believe Hale will actually be convicted?" Angela kept her eyes forward. She wasn't here for the spectacle. She was here for justice. Inside the courtroom, Hale sat at the defense table, clean-shaven, his suit pressed, his posture calm. He looked nothing like the man she had tackled in that abandoned factory. But his eyes sharp, calculating, hadn't changed. When they met hers, he smirked, as though the bars around him were nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. The prosecution laid out its case. Bank records, audio tapes, testimony from Turner, statements from officers who had flipped under pressure. Piece by piece, Hale's empire was dragged into the light. Then it was Angela's turn. She walked to the witness stand, the weight of the city pressing on her shoulders. She recounted everything: the ambulance, the threats, the smear campaigns, the night Hale's men broke into her home and took Sarah. Her voice trembled at times, especially when she spoke of her daughter, but her gaze never wavered. The defense tried to tear her down. "Officer Brown, isn't it true that you acted recklessly when you stopped that ambulance?" "No," Angela answered firmly. "I acted to prevent a criminal from escaping." "Isn't it true that you ignored orders from your superiors?" "I followed the oath I swore to uphold, to protect and serve even when it meant standing alone." The courtroom murmured, the judge calling for silence. Hale's smirk faltered, just slightly. Weeks dragged on. Witness after witness took the stand. Some crumbled under cross-examination. Others stood firm. Turner produced more evidence files he had hidden in multiple places, backups Hale's men hadn't found. Each revelation tightened the noose around Hale's neck. But it came at a cost. Angela's personal life unraveled. Sarah struggled with nightmares, waking in the night screaming for her mother. At school, Children whispered about her fatherless home, her mother's face on every television screen. Angela tried to shield her, but the scars were forming all the same. And Angela herself was weary. The constant cameras, the endless questions, the weight of being a symbol, it was more than she had ever asked for. Some days, she longed to simply walk away, to take Sarah and disappear into a quiet town where no one knew their names. But every time she thought of quitting, she remembered the families Hale's corruption had destroyed, the addicts who had died on poisoned streets, the honest cops pushed out, the neighborhoods left to rot while Hale lined his pockets. She couldn't walk away. The climax of the trial came when Hale himself took the stand. His lawyers had advised against it, but his pride demanded the chance to speak. He painted himself as a scapegoat, a victim of overzealous investigators and a rogue officer with a personal vendetta. She wanted to be a hero, Hale declared, his voice smooth. She fabricated threats, twisted evidence, and endangered her own daughter just to make herself look righteous. Hey. Angela clenched her fists at the accusation, Sarah's small hand squeezing hers from the gallery. Then the prosecution played the tape again, the recording of Hale's own voice, calm and damning. The ambulance is the safest way out. No one will dare stop it. The courtroom fell silent. Hale's mask cracked. After 6 grueling weeks, the jury delivered its verdict. Guilty on multiple counts of corruption, conspiracy, and kidnapping. The judge's gavel struck, sentencing Hale to decades in federal prison. Outside, the courthouse erupted in cheers. Citizens who had once cursed Angela's name now held signs praising her. Reporters called her a hero. But Angela didn't celebrate. She stood on the courthouse steps, Sarah by her side, Jenkins and Turner nearby. Cameras flashed, microphones crowded forward, but Angela's gaze was on her daughter's tired face. Justice had been served, but at what cost? That night, in the quiet of her home, Angela tucked Sarah into bed. The little girl looked up at her, eyes heavy. "Mommy," she whispered, "is it over now?" Angela smoothed her hair, her heart aching. For him, yes, but for us, healing takes time. Sarah nodded sleepily, drifting into dreams. Angela sat by her side long after, watching her breathe, the weight of the city finally beginning to lift. Weeks later, Angela returned to duty. She walked the streets of Cleveland, not as a disgraced officer, not as a hero, but as a woman who had fought for truth and paid the price. Some saluted her, others avoided her, but she no longer cared. She wasn't fighting for approval anymore. She was fighting for the promise she had whispered in the storm months ago. If we don't dare to stop evil, then why wear the badge at all? And those scars remained inside her, inside Sarah, inside the city. Angela knew one thing with certainty. She had stood against the darkness. She had not faltered. And because of that, Cleveland had a chance to breathe again. Cleveland moved forward like a wounded animal, limping, cautious, unsure if the danger was truly gone. Hale's conviction had shaken the city to its core, and though people celebrated, a lingering unease remained. Everyone wondered, if one man could hold such power in the shadows for so long, how many others still lingered unseen? For Angela Brown, life had not returned to normal. It never would. She walked the familiar halls of the precinct again, her badge still heavy on her chest. Officers greeted her with nods, some genuine, others stiff with discomfort. To many, she was a hero. To some, she was still a reminder of how close the system had come to collapsing. And to a few, she was simply a threat, proof that silence could no longer protect corruption. But Angela no longer sought their approval. She had learned the cost of standing tall, and she carried it quietly. At home, the battle scars were clearer. Sarah clung to her mother more often now, unwilling to sleep alone, waking in the night with nightmares. Angela tried to soothe her, reading bedtime stories, humming lullabies, sitting in the dark until Sarah's breathing steadied. One evening, as Angela tucked her in, Sarah whispered, "Will the bad men ever come back?" Angela's heart clenched. She brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead and said softly, No, baby, not as long as I'm here. Oh, but when she closed the door, Angela leaned against the wall, tears burning her eyes. She knew fear couldn't be erased with words. It would take time, patience, and more love than she sometimes felt she had left to give. Captain Jenkins, too, bore her share of burdens. She had become the face of reform inside the department, tasked with cleaning the rot Hale had left behind. Late nights at her desk, stacks of files in front of her, she often called Angela just to talk. This city isn't healed, Jenkins admitted one evening over the phone. People think Hale was the monster. He was just the head of a snake with too many tails. We cut one off, but the rest are still writhing. Angela listened quietly, staring out her window at the city lights. Then we keep cutting, one at a time. There was a pause. Then Jenkins chuckled dryly. You never did know when to quit, Brown. Angela smiled faintly. And you never stopped me. Michael Turner, meanwhile, was both praised and vilified. His articles were read across the country, his name hailed as the reporter who exposed Cleveland's darkest secrets. But threats still lingered. He lived with locks reinforced, blinds drawn, his life forever changed by the truth he refused to bury. One evening, Angela met him at the same diner where their alliance had begun. They sat in the corner booth, the smell of coffee and fried food surrounding them. You ever regret it? Angela asked quietly. Turner shook his head. Every day, and never once. Angela raised an eyebrow. He smirked faintly. I regret the danger, the sleepless nights, the way people look at me like I'm a target. But I don't regret the truth. I don't regret standing with you. Angela lifted her coffee cup in a silent toast. Turner clinked his against it. Yet even with Hale behind bars, shadows still crept through Cleveland. Anonymous notes arrived in Angela's mailbox. Nothing direct, nothing as threatening as before, but enough to remind her that someone was watching. We haven't forgotten. The badge doesn't protect forever. Sarah found one once, tucked between bills. She handed it to Angela with wide, frightened eyes. Angela crumpled it quickly, promising it was nothing, but the fear lingered. At the precinct, cases emerged that bore Hale's fingerprints, old debts, secret favors, names tied to other networks. It was clear his downfall had not erased his reach entirely. Angela often wondered if she had merely cut into a hydra one head gone, more waiting to rise. Despite it all, she sought healing for herself and her daughter. On weekends, Angela drove Sarah to the park, where the girl could laugh on the swings and feed ducks by the frozen pond. For a while, the world seemed simple again. At night, Angela wrote in a journal she never showed anyone. Pages filled with confessions she couldn't speak aloud, her guilt for putting Sarah in danger, her exhaustion, her doubts. Yet each entry ended the same way with a vow. I will keep fighting, for Sarah, for the city, for myself. Spring finally arrived, and with it, a sense of fragile renewal. The city held vigils for victims of corruption, rallies for reform, community meetings where citizens demanded more transparency from their leaders. It wasn't perfect, but it was movement. Angela stood at one such meeting in a crowded church basement. Neighbors spoke of their fears, their anger, their hopes. When Angela's turn came, she stepped forward, her voice steady. I'm not here as a hero, she said. I'm here as a mother, a neighbor, and a cop who nearly lost everything to stop one man. But Hale wasn't alone, and if we want this city to change, it's not about one trial or one arrest. It's about all of us refusing to stay silent. The room erupted in applause, not of adoration, but of solidarity. For the first time, Angela felt she wasn't standing alone. That night, back at home, Sarah curled up on the couch beside her, head resting on her mother's shoulder. The television flickered with muted news, but Angela didn't watch. She stared at her daughter's peaceful face, thinking of the road they had traveled. It wasn't over. It might never be over. But together, they had survived. And together, they would keep moving forward. Angela kissed the top of Sarah's head and whispered, more to herself than to her daughter, we're still here. And that's enough for now. Spring painted Cleveland in softer colors, green leaves budding on trees, children laughing in the parks, streets buzzing with renewed energy. But beneath the surface, the city was still unsettled. Richard Hale was locked away, yet the shadows he left behind twisted and lingered like smoke that refused to clear. Angela knew it. She felt it every time her phone buzzed with an unknown number, every time a car lingered too long behind her on the road, every time Sarah clutched her hand tighter while walking home from school. Hale's body was in prison, but his influence remained free. It began with whispers. Cases tied to Hale's network stalled mysteriously in court. Witnesses who had once agreed to testify recanted, citing fear for their families. Evidence disappeared from locked rooms, files misplaced by clerks. Captain Jenkins slammed a folder onto her desk one evening, frustration etched into every line of her face. "It's his people," she growled. "Judges, clerks, politicians, they're still loyal to him, or they're terrified. He might be caged, but his empire is trying to rebuild." Angela leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Then we tear it down again, piece by piece." But Jenkins shook her head. "It's worse than before. They're not hiding anymore. They're lashing out." The lashing out came swiftly. A patrol car loyal to Jenkins was ambushed on the east side. 2 honest officers were hospitalized, their cruiser reduced to twisted metal. Days later, a warehouse containing seized documents mysteriously caught fire, the flames devouring months of work. And then came the message meant for Angela. One evening, she returned home to find her front porch scorched, blackened by a Molotov cocktail that had been thrown and extinguished before it consumed the house. On the steps lay a spray-painted warning. "You're next." Sarah burst into tears when she saw it, clinging to her mother's waist. Angela held her close, fury and fear battling inside her. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. It was war. In the basement of the radio station, their alliance reconvened. Turner's face was pale, exhaustion etched into his features. Jenkins paced, restless. "They're tightening their grip," Turner said. "I've traced bank wires, money still flowing from accounts Hale set up years ago. Whoever's running this now isn't Hale himself. It's one of his lieutenants, stepping into the vacuum." Angela's jaw clenched. "Then we find him." Turner nodded grimly. "I think I already have. A name keeps surfacing: Victor Cade. Ex-cop, discharged for brutality, disappeared for years. He was Hale's enforcer in the shadows. Now he's the one keeping the machine alive." Angela's eyes narrowed. "Then Victor Cade is our target." The hunt for Cade consumed them. Angela followed trails through decayed neighborhoods, speaking to frightened informants who whispered his name like a curse. Jenkins secured warrants, though judges dragged their feet. Turner published articles, each one exposing another thread of Cade's growing web, and Cade responded in kind. One night, Angela's patrol car was sideswiped by a black SUV, sending her spinning across the icy asphalt. She crawled from the wreckage, bruised but alive, only to find a bullet hole through her windshield where her head had been seconds earlier. Another night, Turner's apartment was ransacked again, this time with messages scrawled on the walls. "Truth dies with you." Still, they pushed forward. The breakthrough came when Harris, the young detective, who had once exposed corrupt officials, brought Angela a lead. "Cade's planning something big," Harris said, urgency in his voice. "A shipment. Drugs, weapons, I don't know. But it's happening at the old shipyard. He wants to prove he still controls the city." Angela exchanged a look with Jenkins. This was it, the chance to cut off the head of the snake once and for all. The night of the raid, rain pounded Cleveland, soaking the docks in silver sheets. Angela moved with a tactical team through the shadows, her weapon steady, her heart pounding. Flashlights swept across rusted shipping containers, voices shouting over the storm. Then the gunfire erupted. Figures emerged from the darkness, armed men loyal to Cade. Bullets ricocheted off metal, shouts echoing. Angela dove behind cover, returning fire, her adrenaline surging. Through the chaos, she saw him, Victor Cade, tall, broad-shouldered, a scar running down his cheek, barking orders to his men. Angela locked eyes with him. He sneered, raising his rifle. The fight turned brutal. Angela advanced, moving from cover to cover, firing when she could. Jenkins' voice shouted commands, officers pushing forward. Turner, watching from a distance with a camera, recorded every second, determined to ensure the truth couldn't be buried again. Finally, Angela cornered Cade near a stack of containers. Rain poured down, lightning splitting the sky. "Cade," she shouted, weapon aimed. "It's over. Drop it." Cade smirked, his voice low and mocking. "You think you can stop this? Hale was just the start. There's always another man in the shadows." Angela's grip tightened. "Not in this city. Not anymore." Cade lunged, raising his rifle. Angela fired. The shot echoed through the storm, and Cade crumpled to the ground, his weapon clattering beside him. Silence followed, broken only by the rain and the distant wail of sirens. By dawn, the raid was over. Dozens of arrests, crates of weapons and drugs seized. Cade's empire shattered before it could fully rise. Angela stood on the docks, soaked to the bone, her chest heaving. Jenkins clapped a hand on her shoulder, pride and exhaustion in her eyes. "You did it," Jenkins said softly. "We did it." Turner approached, camera still in hand. "The world will know," he said. "This time they can't bury it." "Houghton." Angela looked out at the gray horizon, rain washing blood from the concrete into the river. Cleveland was scarred, wounded, still haunted by shadows. But for the first time, Angela believed the city had a chance, not because of heroes, not because of symbols, but because ordinary people had stood up, refused to stay silent, and fought back. She closed her eyes, whispering a silent prayer of thanks for Sarah's safety, for the allies who had stood with her, for the courage that had carried her through. The war wasn't over. It never would be. But this battle was won, and that was enough. The storms had passed, leaving Cleveland washed in fragile sunlight. For the first time in months, the city felt quiet. The headlines had shifted from outrage and corruption to cautious hope. Cade's syndicate falls. Cleveland begins to heal. Angela walked hand in hand with Sarah through a small park near the river. Spring flowers dotted the grass, their colors soft and healing. Sarah skipped ahead, her laughter carrying in the breeze, lighter than it had been in a long time. Angela sat on a bench, watching her daughter chase butterflies, and felt something she had nearly forgotten: peace. Not perfect peace, not everlasting, but enough. Enough to breathe, enough to hope. Life was far from easy. The scars were still there. Sarah's nightmares, the whispers in the precinct, the lingering shadows of men Hale had once controlled. But things had changed. Captain Jenkins continued her reform, rooting out the last of Hale's loyalists. Turner's articles spread across the country, reminding people that corruption only thrives in silence. And Angela, though weary, wore her badge with quiet pride once again. One afternoon, a reporter approached her outside the precinct. "Officer Brown," he asked, "after everything you've endured, what keeps you going? Why not walk away?" Angela paused, glancing at Sarah, who stood nearby clutching her schoolbooks. Then she answered simply, "Because if we don't dare to stop evil, then why wear the badge at all?" The words spread, quoted in newspapers, repeated on evening broadcasts. But to Angela, they were not a slogan, they were a vow. That evening, Angela sat with Sarah on their porch, the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Sarah leaned against her mother, her voice soft. "Mommy," she whispered, "are the bad people gone now?" Angela wrapped an arm around her, holding her close. "Some are. Some will come again, but we'll face them together. And as long as we keep standing up, they'll never win." Sarah looked up at her, eyes bright with trust. "Like you did. How and all." Angela kissed her forehead, her heart swelling. "Like we did." The city would never be perfect. There would always be shadows, always be battles to fight. But Angela had learned that true strength wasn't in standing alone, it was in standing together. She had faced the fury of a crowd, the weight of corruption, the terror of losing her daughter. She had been smeared, threatened, hunted, yet she had endured. Not because she was unbreakable, but because she chose, again and again, to rise after every blow. And that was the lesson she carried, the message she hoped her daughter and her city would never forget. That evil wins only when good people stay silent. That courage doesn't mean fearlessness, it means standing firm even when your knees shake. That justice isn't just the work of courts and laws, it's the work of hearts that refuse to bend. As the last light of day faded, Angela held her daughter close and whispered, "We're still here, and that's enough." And in that quiet moment, beneath the Cleveland sky, it was. My dear friends, if you've stayed with me until the very last moments, surely your heart has gone through a whirlwind of emotions. Surprise, anger, compassion, even a lump in your throat at the choice made by the black female police officer. What do you think about her action? Was it admirable courage or a risky recklessness? If you were in her place, what would you do? Leave your comment below. If you believe that justice must be protected by the truth, press 1. If you feel there are still mysteries left unsolved, press 0. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you too will always stand on the side of justice, even though the path to the truth is never easy.